Hi, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of Living in the Good Space. I am Annette Johnson, the host, and also known as the Fly Coach. I am looking forward to the conversation that I'm going to have tonight. I started Living in the Good Space over a year ago. I'm actually in my second season. I started it during the time of COVID and was really looking for an outlet, looking for an opportunity to be a light and to shed some positivity during some challenging and difficult times. And I really wanted to cultivate a space where I could have conversations with people that through their expertise or their experience or profession, that they could help people tap into some positivity and to quote unquote live in the good space. And my guest tonight is the perfect guest for that. I want to tell you a little bit about who she is. Mary Robinson is the founder and executive director Emeritus for Imagine. It's a center for coping with loss, and it's an organization that provides grief support for children. Mary's vision is to normalize grief. She has 30 years experience in the corporate and nonprofit sector. She has a bachelor's in English, a master's in applied psychoanalysis, and a certificate in thanatology, which I can't wait to talk to her about what that means and what that experience was like. She's a member of the Association of Deaf Education and Counseling and for the National Association for the Advancement of Psychoanalysis. She serves on the board of the Academy of Clinical and Applied Psychoanalysis, and she's written numerous articles. She also is a CNN Heroes Award winner for 2019. I mean, if you're going to be acknowledged for your body of work, what not greater way than to be recognized as a CNN hero? And she's also was recognized as a New Jersey business leader over 60 in 2021. So please help me welcome to Living in the Good Space, Mary Robinson.
Hi, Annette.
Hi, welcome, welcome, welcome. I am so excited to be able to talk to you. And I've been looking forward to this conversation. I love to give people their flowers. So I take the time to read through people's bios, and you have an impressive bio. And what not an honor to be recognized for all of your work as a CNN hero. And we're going to get to that because I want to hear all the juicy details about what that experience was like. But I just want to say, I just want to applaud you for all of the great work that you're doing and for being focused and committed and passionate about helping children. And I know that has expanded for you in your new business, cope with grief and loss. So congratulations to you on all of the wonderful work that you've done.
Thank you so much, Annette. It's
So
really
I like I said, I believe in giving people their flowers. You deserve your flowers. But I just want to jump in because I want to hear like how you got here. I want to hear a little bit about what led you here. I've watched your videos. I've been following you for years. I know that, but I want the listeners to hear a little bit about your story.
Sure. Well, the way you and I met was
Yeah.
at Prudential. So I worked for Prudential for 14 years, first in IT and then in corporate community relations, which is really when I started to learn more about the nonprofit sector. And it's when I was first exposed to the field of children's grief support. Part of my job was grant making, giving away the company's money to nonprofits. And one of the organizations that came to us was called Rainbows, an international nonprofit that provides support for grieving kids. You actually came and helped me with facilitating some trainings. And that's when, I really took a leap of faith. I loved working at Pru, and they gave me so many opportunities, and I learned, so many skills, and it really prepared me for kind of taking that leap of faith, leaving the corporate world and going to work full time in the nonprofit sector and basically running, starting and founding a couple of nonprofits, but the one we're here to talk about is Imagine. And the reason I remember, when I first learned about Rainbows and I was going to become a volunteer, I remember I was driving to my job at Prudential in Newark, crying tears of gratitude because I was going to be able to help kids like my brother and I had been. So the reason I was so drawn to the field of children's grief support was because I was a child in grief. And my father died when I was 14, my brother was 15. So this is 1974, when there was a complete lack of awareness that
Yeah.
kids, when they have a parent die, it's a
Yeah.
trauma and they
Yeah.
need support so that they don't end up traumatized.
Mhm.
So I was just so joyous to discover this field, and decided to really take that leap and leave the corporate world and work in the field of children's grief support, first for Rainbows, and then
Mhm.
striking out on my own. So it
Mhm.
was really the death of my father that inspired me to do this work and to take this path.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad that there are resources today, because I lost my father when I was 9. And Mary, I kid you not, to this day, no one talks about it.
Yeah.
There was never, my mother doesn't talk about it. My grandparents, when they were alive, didn't talk about it. My uncle didn't talk about it. He had a twin brother. No one talked about it. I
Hmm.
went to the viewing at the funeral parlor. Um, I went to see him in the hospital before he died. Like, so hello, I know that he died, and I was a
Yep.
part of this experience, but no one ever talked about it. There was no counseling, but there was no conversation for
Right.
us
Yes.
about what happened.
I forgot we had that in common, losing our
Yeah,
dads when we were
yeah.
young. And yeah, back in the day. And I attribute that to two things. One is Freud, believe it or not, he actually talked about that when someone dies, we need to decaffect from the object, basically detach and put away all the pictures, don't say their name, don't share memories, tell stories. And thankfully, what we've learned over the years is that is not helpful
No,
to human beings
yeah.
and their healing. The goal is really to continue the bond with the person that died. Like, just because your dad died when you were 9, he's your
Right.
dad for the rest of your life. And we can
Yes.
have a relationship with them. It's just different.
Yeah.
And we can talk to them and write to them and include them in our family traditions. And
Yeah.
so Freud got it wrong. He got a lot of things right, but he got that wrong. And then the other thing I think for our generation is that our parents, like our moms, their role model at the time was Jackie Kennedy Onassis and Coretta Scott King. And
Mhm.
those two women were role models, for carrying on after the tragic death of their husband and being
Yeah.
strong and courageous and stoic and not talking about it. And years later, when Coretta Scott King was dying of cancer,
Mhm.
she said, if I had to do it over again, I would have mourned my husband's death and helped my children to mourn. And I
Mhm.
believe that my sickness, my illness, is because I kept all that grief bottled up inside.
Mm.
So I think that that was kind of the way it was. And thankfully, we have learned, no, talk about it, tell
Yeah.
children the truth. And I was 40 when the first time someone asked me, "Tell me about your dad. What was he like?" So I can relate the fact that nobody ever said anything to you. And I started crying. It was such a relief to be able to talk about him.
Mhm.
And so that's what we teach. One of the things we teach is, like, children and adults, we want to hear the names of the people who died. We want to hear stories. We want to
Yeah.
hear memories. Tell us
Yeah.
about them. So
Yeah. You prepared me for what was to come around loss in our immediate circle. I did some work with you with Rainbows and Good Grief.
yep,
And I learned so much in Good Grief. I remember taking off work for the 3 days. It was a very intensive
the training.
training
Yeah.
that I went through. And I'll never forget, it was in that training that I was even still dealing with, like, the loss of my father, of my grandmother. I was extremely close to my grandmother, dealing with that loss. So I'm like, wow, this really is impactful, because just because you don't talk about it, or you kind of compartmentalize it and put it away, doesn't mean that it goes away. They
No.
come up in
Right.
my life through a song,
Yeah.
through a meal, the holidays. Like, their
Yes.
spirit is forever present in my
Yeah.
life. And I remember feeling that weekend, like, it's okay. Like,
Yeah.
I got this sense of, like, okay, I can be at peace. It's okay,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
they transcended into another form, but they're still with me. You know?
Yes. Yeah.
So how do you like, what are some of the things that you're doing today through your work with Imagine? Like, how do you help children cope? Like, what are some of the exercises or techniques that you use?
Right. So Imagine is a free peer grief support program. So kids meet with other kids their same age in groups no larger than about 10. And
Hmm.
we start at age 3, we go up to age 18. So 3 to 5 year olds are together, 6 to 9, etc., based on developmental age.
Hmm.
Little kids, they play.
Hmm.
Play is children's work. It's
Hmm.
how they tell us the story of their life. It's how they communicate symbolically to us.
Yeah.
So it's how they do their grief work. So when you come to Imagine, if you're there on a night of support, you'll see the younger kids, especially, playing, and you think, oh, they're just playing. No, they're working really hard.
Hmm.
Um, Teenagers spend their time talking. The parents and caregivers also talk. But what we do, we don't actually have a curricula. So
Okay.
it's all about following the lead of each individual child, because grief is unique to each individual person. It's
Hmm.
unique, it's idiosyncratic. If my brother died and your brother died, we don't actually know what it is for each other. We know what it is for us because we have our personality. We had our brother, the relationship with our brother. They have their personality, and so we don't impose on kids a timeline and
Hmm.
activity. We always have activities there for them to do, like making a memory box and decorating it and bringing things
Hmm.
in from home in memory of the person who died,
Hmm.
like daddy's baseball cap or mommy's perfume. So we always have arts and crafts activities or games to help the children tell their story, share memories, but also just play and be kids and talk about their life. The cool thing is, the kids, when they're there, one of the first things they get is, I'm not alone. I'm not the only one who had a
Yeah.
mommy or daddy die. And
Yeah.
that's a very powerful thing. So it makes them feel less isolated and different.
Hmm.
Um, and so even when they're playing, they know everybody here has had someone who died. And
Hmm.
one of the things we have at Imagine is something called the hospital room, because a lot of the kids who come after a parent has been ill and in a hospital
Wow.
room for a long time. And they've spent time, the children have spent time in the hospital room
Hmm.
completely without any power or control. Don't touch the bed, be quiet. So
Yeah.
they come to Imagine in the hospital room, which is for therapeutic play, and there's a real hospital bed, and they get to raise and lower it. They tell the volunteers who facilitate the groups. I one time passed the room, and a facilitator was lying in the hospital bed, and she goes, apparently I have a subdural hematoma. So there were 2 8-year-olds in there with her who's told her, get in the bed, you have a subdural hematoma. So what 8-year-old knows that? But I'd imagine they're with other kids who've heard about
Yeah.
chemotherapy, and did your mom lose her hair, and did she have a port? And so it normalizes it for the kids, and it helps them kind of weave into their life that part of their life, that
Yeah.
story of their life, and get some control back and get some power back. So Imagine is a place for kids to come, find out they're not alone, develop some coping tools, which is talking and sharing memories, getting
Hmm.
support from your peers,
Hmm.
um, um, learning how to express yourself through art and clay, how to manage anger in the volcano room, for example, versus beating up on your brother. You go and you punch pillows or stomp on bubble wrap. Um, and it's not time limited, because there's no time frame. It's not like, oh, 10 weeks and you're done. So children can come and stay as long as they want. Many stay for years. And one of the reasons that's important, and what's unique about our model, is that children re-grieve their loss during different stages of development. So when you're 5 and your dad dies, and you get a little bit older and you go to play Little League and you see all the other dads coaching,
Right.
you miss your dad in a whole nother way as a 9-year-old. And then you go to high school and dating and driving and
Yeah.
sports. So children will re-grieve their loss as they develop cognitively, spiritually,
Hmm.
emotionally. And
Hmm.
so that ongoing support is essential. Some kids come for a period of time and the family feels, okay, we're good.
Yeah.
And then they may leave, but sometimes they come back. They get a little older, and the child misses their parent in a whole nother way, and they need more support. So it's very
Yeah.
organic, And one of the things I wanted to share with you, the beauty of this model is that it's community-based. Like, we don't fill our center with experts on child development or child loss. We train, like the training you talked about going to for those 3 days, we train the adults and even teenagers from the community, from all walks of life, to be the facilitators of the support groups. Because when a child is grieving, there's nothing pathological about it. There's nothing wrong. They don't need to be in therapy or counseling. They just need a supportive environment and a safe environment and a place where they can have all their feelings and tell their story and find out they're not alone. So we rely on the wisdom and strength of the members of the community to come and create that space.
Yeah, and you just reminded me of when I made that reference that going through that training helped me for things to come. My youngest daughter lost someone that was very close to her, best friend, very, very unexpectedly. We were very close to him and the family. And I literally felt like my heart and soul had left my body. It was the most difficult thing I had ever done as a parent, was to see her so devastated and so sad. But I remember one thing from the learning and from the training, and it was sometimes just sitting and being present with a person, not asking any questions. You might be sitting in silence, but just being there and being present. And it came to me, and I remember going into her room one night just to see if she needed anything before she went to bed. And I was sitting on the side of her bed. And then I got up and I said, okay, well, I just wanted to check and see if you needed anything. And she said to me, and she's very introverted, doesn't really share a lot. And she said to me, can you stay? And I was like, yes. And I just sat back down on the bed. I could cry now just thinking about it. I just sat back down on the bed. We didn't even talk, Mary. I just sat on the bed. She stayed in the position that she was in, and eventually she fell asleep.
Yeah.
But I remembered through my training, I said, I'm talking to myself while I'm sitting on the bed. Don't ask her any questions. Follow her lead. If she starts to talk, you talk. But I didn't force myself on her. I didn't ask her any questions. I just sat in silence. And it was the most powerful thing. I will never forget it. And I felt so proud of myself when I left, because I felt, okay, she really needed that. And I was present enough to recognize it and to just sit with it.
That's beautiful. That gave me chills. Like,
so that came out in your training, though. I mean, it was one of the, you go to these training programs and you leave with what you leave with. But that was one of the things, because I'm a talker, I'm extroverted. To me, helping is asking a million questions and trying to get at the root of what it is that you need so I can give it to you.
Right.
That's not always, especially dealing in grief, that is not always what people need.
When people are grieving, so beautiful job with that. And, they need our presence and our companionship. There's nothing we can say or do to make it better or take their pain away. So that's why we follow their lead. If they want to speak, we always say, if they give you a paragraph, give them a sentence. Right? Yes. And if they give you a sentence, give them a word. It's, our asking questions is about our need to know, as opposed to where they need to go and telling you what they need to tell you. So our presence is the most healing and powerful thing. And, one of the things I've learned doing this work is that mourning is the key to how well we're going to do when we're grieving a loss. Grief are just all the feelings. But if you keep those feelings inside, we're not going to do very well. So the key is expressing them, mostly through talk, but through writing and other ways. And what I've learned is you actually can't mourn alone. You need one other person. And that night, you were that other person on your daughter's bed. Like you need a witness. So, and you can't, so talk is the best thing, but not if you're alone. Like, you need a mirror, someone to reflect back to you, someone to hear you. And to let you say, my mom, after my dad died, she was 44. She said, I must have told the story of your dad's illness and death over 100 times to Carlin in the living room, her best friend. And that's because that's part of mourning, is telling your story over and over again, sometimes until it becomes real for you, until you don't need to say it anymore. And it's funny, when my mom shared that with me, it was years after my dad died, is when I realized my brother and I never got to tell our story.
Mm,
So kids need to tell their story too. What
yeah,
happened?
yeah,
Where were you? What did you see? You know, like, not that we would ask those questions, but they need to be able to tell you what happened.
yeah.
So
You know, I'm listening to you talk about that and being in the groups and the art and the different experiences, and I'm like, I feel like I needed that as an adult.
mm,
Like I needed to, you know, I've grown up in a circle where death kind of happens, and then it, you know, it comes and it goes. Like there's no processing, there's no, you know, let's talk about it. There's no, it just kind of comes and goes. And I process through talking. So I find that with death, I wind up internalizing a lot of things. I hold it in because I don't feel like I have that space to talk
yeah,
about it. Like people don't really want to talk about it. They don't want to be engaged.
yeah,
And it's like, let's just get past this as quickly as possible. And so I
that's
think,
so true.
yeah, so I think the other thing that your training helped me to realize is it's okay. I don't need a time frame. So the fact that I still talk about my grandmother's death and it's been 40 years
Hmm.
is okay, because
Hmm.
that's the impact she had on my life. That's how profound our relationship was and her love for me was. I don't have to not talk about
Right.
her, or you know what I mean? Like not revisit my time with her because it's been
Yeah.
40 years. And I think a lot of times people do that. They put time on it and it's like, you're still
Yeah.
talking about that? And that was 40. How long has she been gone? Or how long has he been gone? You're still grieving and it's been 20 years? Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. We will grieve the people we love and lose for the rest of our lives. And I
Yeah.
think that's one of the myths, is that there's this getting over it or going back to normal. It's no, like what it really is learning to live with the joy and sadness of life side by side, kind of
Mhm,
integrating the loss into your life and allowing yourself to have all your feelings. Like
mhm,
our society is so scared of feelings that aren't just happy feelings, you know, and we're bombarded with images that make us think we're supposed to be like happy and great all the time. And it's that's just not what human life is. Human life has suffering, and it's learning to, like, one of the things I've learned during this work is listening to a psychologist talk who works with children and families, and I'm going to draw a blank on his name, Dr. It'll come back to me, but he was asked at this conference, what's the most important thing to tell children? And he thought about it and thought about it, and he said, the most important thing is to teach them how to lose. So when you think about it, we are really good at helping children win and get trophies and succeed, and you know, but nobody teaches them, how do you deal with the painful feelings that come along with loss when you don't make the team, or your friend, you know, moves away, or you get broken up with, you know, I mean, all the losses of childhood, your
mhm,
parents separate.
mhm,
It's just like life is full of loss, but nobody teaches us what to do with those feelings. And that's
mhm,
why, I mean, one of the things that drives me is I really believe the world is driven by unaddressed and unresolved grief. And like, you walk into any 12-step meeting, any therapist's office, any psychiatric unit, in any hospital, any prison, and you'll hear nothing but stories of grief and loss. So our
mhm.
goal is help kids at the time of their loss so that they
Yeah,
can, you know,
yeah,
develop healthy coping tools, grow more resilient to deal with that loss, but any future losses.
yeah,
So instead of acting it out in society, I think it is, no, anyway,
yeah. No, and I was reading something, I saw where there's 200,000 in the US, 200,000 children lost a parent or caregiver to COVID. So if you put COVID is an incident, right? It's a pandemic. So put that on top of, you know, everything else that's going on in the world that, you know, so the divorce, or breakups, or, you know, whatever it is,
Yeah,
whatever the loss is. So
abandonment, deportation,
abandonment,
incarceration, like,
exactly.
yeah,
So we're not even factoring in, those numbers are just related to COVID, 5
right.
million globally to COVID.
Yep.
That's just that little box. But then there's all of the other examples. And there's,
Yeah. When I see those stories about the children who've had a parent or caregiver die due to COVID, I'm so grateful for the attention that the media is giving to bereaved children and the importance of caring for them.
Mhm.
But I also want to say, you know, children, there's been an epidemic of grief among children forever.
Yeah.
There's 5.3 million bereaved children in the country today. 5.3 million. 200,000 more were added to 5.3 million because of death due to COVID. So we are surrounded by grieving kids. You know, children have parents dying every day of everything imaginable. Yesterday, today, tomorrow. And you know, thankfully that, you know, and sadly, but the, you know, it's almost like a silver lining. I hate to say that about COVID, but you know, finally there's our
Shining a
society
light on it.
getting it that, oh my gosh, when children have a parent die or grandmother, like we have to pay attention. They need support. It impacts their mental health and wellness. So
that's so true. And I mean, we haven't even talked about like domestic violence, kids that, you know what I mean, lose both of their parents. One's incarcerated, one is murdered. Like, it's overwhelming to think about, which, you know, I've had you on my list. So when I first came up with this idea to do this, I wrote out a list of guests. So you've been on that list for 2 years. And you said something that made me think of this. And that is, I didn't want this show to be all about roses and gold and everything is positive and perfect. You know, living in the good space is not about having a perfect life. It's about being good to yourself, cultivating a good space when you're going through challenging times, right? So the coping mechanisms, you know, the taking care of yourself in a healthy way, giving your body and your mind and your soul the good stuff versus reaching for the stuff that numbs you, right? And prevents you, because that's not going to be healthy. It's going to be a quick short-term fix, but it's not going to be healthy and it's not going to be sustainable. So so that's why I couldn't wait to have you on to talk about this, because I know this is a huge, huge need, is for, and I'm hoping that the parents that are listening will, you know, go to your website, Imagine, look around, because I know people who have lost people due to COVID. And I mean, that's what's happened recently, right?
Yeah.
And I would love for them to feel that they have a place that they can take their children and have resources. I know there are books out there that you can read. You know, ultimately you can go to a therapist, but I think the work that you're doing and the safe space that you're creating for people to just be themselves, and to be with other people so they don't feel so isolated.
Yeah, that's essential. And just so people know, there's like 500 centers like Imagine around the country. So, you know, there's almost one in every state. Many states have more than one. New Jersey has 4. And my goal, I almost feel like I want to be like Johnny Appleseed and keep opening centers. Every county should have one. You know, here in New Jersey, there's 330,000 bereaved youth right now between the age of 0 to 18. And so, yes, it's a resource. We're serving many families where the children had a parent or caregiver die of COVID. And one of the things these articles didn't include was the fact that there's 500 children's grief support centers around the country. They're saying like, oh my God, what are we going to do? And there's no resources. I'm like, I wrote letters to the editor. Yes, there are resources, not enough, but people should know that this is a resource in their community. And
I'll make sure that I add that to when I make this available, the show available. I'll make sure that I add that there's 500. You said there are 500 centers across
across the United States.
Across the United
And they're
States.
in other countries too. I mean,
Yeah.
Canada has them. Rainbows is in Ireland and Britain, and I mean, the UK has done a tremendous job of providing bereavement support for youth.
Yeah. So now you're transitioning a little bit, right? I mean, I know I read that you're still working with Imagine. You're in kind of emeritus status, but you're
Yes.
shifting into your own business. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's really a dream come true. Is I always, from the time I was in high school, I wanted to be a psychologist and have a private practice and help
Mhm.
people who were suffering. I've always been so curious about what makes people tick, why we suffer and how we can suffer less, child development and family systems. So while I've been working in the field of children's grief support, I went back to school and got my master's in applied psychoanalysis, and I'm continuing in school to get my certification. But, you know, like I said, I would love to be the Johnny Appleseed and keep opening centers. So I love getting them started and up and running. I mean, I was at Imagine for 10 years, and then I was like, you know what? I don't want to run a business anymore. Like, we got so big. I was
Mhm.
like, I'm an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
So it's like I like creating and building and making things happen. So I was really ready to find the next executive director who I'm working closely with now. She's fantastic. So I'm helping her transition. I'm still doing development for them, but I have finally opened a practice of my own. So I opened an office in Madison. I focus mostly on grief and loss and work with individuals and families. And this is really because and I refer them to Imagine or Good Grief, because most people, someone dies, you don't need therapy or counseling typically. Sometimes you do need more than peer support. So I want to be there for those families and also for people who can't get to a center for any reason. So I see people virtually and in the space. I also work with I work with anybody. So anybody that wants to have their lives work better, their relationships work better, people who are struggling with depression and anxiety and, just suffering and not able to have the life that they want. So I also, when I was kind of coming upon feeling ready to move on, I looked at my life and thought, how do I continue to have my life, like what I've suffered in my own life, make a difference in the world and matter. And one of the things that I rarely talk about is in my 20s, I had an eating disorder. And so one of the things I specialized and recovered from it, but worked so hard, I think it was the hardest thing I ever did was to recover from that. And it came out of losing my dad. Like that was one of my ways of coping. So sometimes coping looks not very healthy, but it's better than maybe heroin or suicide. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's hard for people to hear, but we want people to find healthier ways, than that pint of Ben and Jerry's. And so that's one of the things I'm specializing in too. It's like, I want to help people who are suffering with disordered eating because it's a terrible way to live and it's not necessary. So yeah, like my private practice is really about helping people to transform the suffering in their life into something good and to be able to live with the joy and sadness of life side by side without hurting themselves. I think of when living in the good space is about definitely making good choices for care, self-care. But I also think it's making good choices with what we tell ourselves in our head.
Yes.
And like, for me, if I start to be critical of myself, I'm like, I've had enough practice now that I'm like, okay, thanks for sharing. That's not real, And I think it was Abraham Lincoln who said, we're as happy as we make up our minds to be. And you can actually choose happiness. Now, not if you are, have depression, like you suffer from a chemical and you need medication. I'm all for that. But for the most part, like, we determine our reality. We make our reality. And like Viktor Frankl said, it's like we choose the meaning to what happens to us. So that for me, like when I was thinking about your podcast and your mission with this about living in the good space and what does that mean for me, especially during these couple of years, being
Yeah.
during COVID, and it's been awful and, beyond awful for
Yeah.
it in every way. So,
Yeah. But
and such a
this is therapeutic.
challenge.
This is therapeutic for me, so that saying, do what you love and love what you do. Like I needed to be engaged during that time. Like we were literally, like everybody was on lockdown, right? So we're not going anywhere. We're not, like you're glued to the television, you're watching the death reports. I'm like, I cannot thrive in these conditions. Like I
Yeah.
need something to distract me, not to avoid the reality, but to kind of shift my focus on something that's going to be more nurturing and
Yeah.
that's going to be more caring for myself.
Yeah.
and
Yes.
and when I have these conversations with people, and even in the preparation for the conversation and the show, it helps me. I always walk away with a new gem to put in my little jewel box. I call it my jewel box that
Oh,
I
I love
can,
it.
yeah, I can go back to when I am in those tough spaces, right? Because
Yeah.
it's one thing for you to say, yeah, these are the 5 things that you should do, or as a coach, help people shift from here to there. But then you need that for yourself too.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes
So
sometimes we can be our worst enemies, and that's not very helpful. So
yeah, yeah.
need those jewel boxes.
The jewel box, not toolbox, but jewel box. So I want a couple minutes before we have to wrap up. I got to talk about the CNN heroes. I watched the video last night and then I watched it again today, and I'm like,
Uh,
okay, this was such a phenomenal experience. I'm going to post it on my social media. I feel like, where was I at the time? Because I usually track with CNN, the Heroes program. I don't know how I missed it, because I would have been like I would have been like sending you
yeah.
email messages like, oh my God, Mary, I saw you. But I just want to hear a little bit about, what was that experience like? Did you get nominated? Like, how did you get on that stage?
Yeah, I had my development director at Imagine nominated me, and nominated me for kind of like all the years of grief support, starting even before Rainbows, volunteering there, and then
Mhm.
Good Grief and Imagine. And so she did it, it's all, thanks to her, she did a phenomenal job nominating me. And that I mean, it was just such a blessing to get selected and to end up one of the 10, to go to New York, be on that stage. It was the most joyous experience, something I will never forget. CNN took such good care of us.
Wow.
It was just so professionally done. So I got to meet the other 9 heroes from around the world.
Mhm.
And, they just spoiled us. And then they also gave us media training. They sent us to California 2 months later to the Annenberg Foundation for nonprofit training. Like
Wow.
literally, this was like so it was like, first of all, it was phenomenal to get that light shown
Yeah.
on this issue,
Mhm.
and to raise awareness that, we have to pay attention when children have a loss. Then to
Mhm.
meet Anderson Cooper, who also had his dad die when he was a kid, and have him introduce me. I mean,
That
I
introduction was
have
everything.
my CNN Hero Award here. It was an absolute,
His introduction was everything.
yeah,
Just beautiful.
I know. Yeah. So like I said, I mean, it's something I'll never ever, obviously just never ever forget. And it was such a joy. And to be able to also highlight the incredible staff and volunteers who make Imagine possible, and like reward, in a sense, their good work in our community that has really
Yeah.
made Imagine what it is.
But the thing that is really so phenomenal about that experience too, I mean, of course, you being recognized is wonderful, but the very thing that you've been working so hard to do, to elevate this issue, it was elevated to the world
Yes.
stage.
Yes. Yes. Yep. It was a priceless gift.
Yes.
Absolutely.
So mission accomplished. It was a beautiful, beautiful thing to watch, and congratulations again.
Thank you.
Um, so I know we talked about living in the good space a little bit, your perspective, but what does it mean to you personally? Like when you hear that phrase, living in the good space, what does that mean for Mary Robinson?
Mm, I think, for me, it is about managing my thoughts, my mind, that monkey mind, because that has the power to make or break you. And so it's having a healthy mind and having a safe home and being full of gratitude. I think living in the good space is like every day
Mhm.
remembering to be grateful, whether it's for the clean sheets on my bed or
Yes.
the meal I'm eating that I cooked myself, that I have the ability to do,
Mhm.
healthy body, being able to go for a walk in nature. And I think that's what it comes down to for me, is just being grateful and remembering that I create my reality with
Mhm.
what I choose to think and what meaning I choose to make out of
Mhm.
whatever's going on in my life.
Mhm.
Um, and lately it's been like also engaging more with my family, which they're all very far away. So I've devoted, kind of made it a goal, if you will,
Mhm.
to be more connected. And
Mhm.
that's the beauty of technology. Like I
Yeah.
FaceTime with my grandniece in Vietnam every two
Mhm.
weeks. And
Nice.
anyway,
Yeah.
so those family connections and gratitude and um, not letting my mind tell me things that are
Right.
not helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And what can you share with someone who's watching who may be trying to help a young person navigate grief? So a lot of times, you lose a parent or a caretaker and you wind up with someone else, right? Who has the responsibility now for helping you, grow up. You have a new
Mhm.
caretaker. What can you say to that person, the caretaker, to help them help somebody, one of our youth
Right.
navigate? Yeah.
Well, I think it's to be present, like, and not to be afraid of talking about the reality, like telling the truth to children is the most important thing. Like,
Hmm.
like, um, and acknowledging their loss. I always call it knocking on the door of their heart. Um, like, so when they are ready to talk, they know you're a person that they can go to.
Hmm.
Like the
Hmm.
single most important thing that helps a grieving child or teenager is the active presence of at least one caring, functional adult in their life.
Hmm.
So each adult has a job to do. If they have a child in their life that's had a loss, it's to show up and
Hmm.
say, and I'm so sorry for your loss. I am here. And don't expect the child to come to you when they need you. So you have to keep knocking on the door of their heart. You have to keep reminding them you're here. Giving them a journal to write in, being a role model for talking about feelings, and
Hmm.
that it's okay to, and then letting the child have all their feelings. One of the
Yeah.
things that, so we always say, for a boy that's father has just died, we
Mhm.
don't say, oh, you're the man of the family now. Like with the best of
How many times do
intentions.
we hear that?
Yeah, people say things with the best of intentions, but that's not helpful.
Mhm.
Don't, let like, or telling a little girl, oh, don't cry, your mommy wouldn't want you to cry.
Yeah.
Like we hear these things. And
Yeah.
so let children have all their feelings, let them
Mhm.
know that you're there for them and that their loss matters. And
Mhm.
also talk about the person who died. Like,
Mhm.
and it's okay if they don't say anything, it's okay. They are listening to
Yep.
everything.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Thank you for that. That is so important. Wow. I appreciate you so much. Thank you for coming on the show, for sharing. Um, and I'm just so happy that we were connected, our paths crossed. I've learned so much from you about how to be present and um, just, I'm more open to and more comfortable with talking about and dealing with loss just for myself, just for me
yeah,
personally, because I grew up during a time where it wasn't talked about. I didn't feel cared for. And
yeah.
so I know how to care for myself now.
Hmm.
And I try to do that with other people and share what I've learned with other people. And so thank you so much for creating a space where I got to participate and to learn some things that are going to help me take better care of myself.
Thank you, Annette. It's been a joy knowing you all these years and to have had the chance to work together. And thank you for the work you're doing with living in a good space.
Thank you
Um,
so much.
yeah.
All right. Take care.
Okay. Bye.